Hi there, Joshua Allen and Jason Furch again with the breach report. Big news is we have some video this time, so you can finally see what we look like. I know a lot of people like that, and plus we had to get cleaned up a little bit before you could see us. So kicking things off, we are going to be taking a look real fast at the Nancy Pelosi laptop situation. We've been tracking this. Then we're going to dive into some more ransomware that's happened. And something I really want to cover, which is really big deal today, is this ZINC APT that's been targeting pen testers and threat researchers. So, that's our team. So something we definitely care a lot about. So kicking off with the Pelosi situation, we talked about the Pennsylvania woman who was accused of stealing this before, Riley Williams. She's actually been banned from using the internet now because the FBI has suspected that she's destroying evidence, has been encouraging people to delete messages. One such message is this one right here. This is from Discord. I stole blank from Nancy Pelosi. I don't care. I took her hard drives. I don't care. So she obviously has left quite a trail for herself online, including all the videos. And there's even a screen grab of her saying, "Hey, they got the laptop." So um, once again, it really highlights just how easy it is to find people online and why you should be careful what's out there.
All the evidence is out there.
Absolutely. Going over to Nancy Pelosi's side, her response is that she's not necessarily really worried about it. I guess it was a presentation laptop in a conference room, allegedly. Quote, but her quote is, "But that doesn't matter. It could be any laptop, and anytime a constituent writes to a member of Congress, it's confidential. True. And for them to take that as a violation not only of my office, but of my connection to my constituents, also federal law." So that's really not the point, is what's on it. One of the things that we looked at the last breach report is there were pictures of people's laptops with Outlook open. So if there were emails from constituents, they were probably read because people couldn't be bothered to just hit Windows L, which is a very simple thing. It takes less time to hit that than it does to get up out of your chair and put all your stuff in your pockets. So there's really no excuse for not locking your workstation when you walk away. And in this case, it could be extremely detrimental to people who've written private emails to Miss Pelosi.
Yep, 22 years old, threw her life away. It's a shame.
Yep, it is. So, talked a little bit about this at the beginning. This is WestRock Company. They're a packaging firm. They're a huge packaging firm in the amount of $17 billion worth. So they're quite a big company. They support tons of customers doing packaging. Nothing to talk about there. Now, what's going on here is they've been hit with a ransomware attack. It hasn't completely stopped their operations, but they actually have been delayed according to the report. So some of their operational technology, which is referred to as OT, we hear a lot about IT, information technology, and that's kind of been the focus. But OT, which I think is going to be more of a trend, right, being attacked and being defended, has kind of been overlooked in the past, and it's starting to be a lot more vectors, especially in the industrial field and manufacturing, because it's what they use, oil and gas, right? This is the kind of technology that runs conveyor belts, CNC grinders, equipment, uh, even things that run maybe like a factory floor, like it's just a thing that they log in and they can run things. So they're still Windows systems, a lot of them. Some of them are old Windows systems based because they have to be proprietary software. And typically they're separated from the network, which is why there hasn't been a lot of software put on these things to protect them because they're quote gapped. But as we're seeing, they're becoming more and more targeted.
It's a lot of legacy software too. That's something to note as well,
Yes.
where you have these systems that, you've got one guy who's been maintaining it for 20 years and he knows how to run that system.
Yep.
And those things are actually very difficult to patch and defend against, especially if there's no outside support. If you break something, do you break the entire operation chain? Like, how does that impact things? But yes.
Yeah, I worked for an oil and gas company, and we had a whole separate team that dealt just with the OT stuff because of that, because you couldn't approach it the same way. It wasn't joined to the Active Directory the same way. It's really a different type of cybersecurity. It's not IT security. It's OT security. It's a
the
different
the
thing.
discovery aspect of it too, right?
Yeah.
How do you know what's if it's not connected, everything's air gapped. You don't have like a convenient way of actually mapping the entire network. topology.
No, traditionally though, that kind of stuff, especially SCADA systems, are
Mhm.
mapped beforehand because it's kind of part
Yeah.
of the blueprinting in the factory. So you do have some help there, but in terms of the IP side, no. Now with WestRock, this came in January 25th was their first release. This is their official release on their website. They said they detected a ransomware incident impacting certain of its operational information technology systems. They initiated response and containment protocols. Their security teams and firms are looking to remediate it. So it's kind of an ongoing situation.
Hmm.
Next day, January 26th, they provided a very short update on it, but they're working around the clock to complete their investigation to restore normalized operations as quickly as possible. But they're mentioning that with some exception, the company's operations have continued to run and deliver for its customers. So it's good news for them is that they are still at least able to stay in business, but I'm sure this is still a pretty expensive problem.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder what the ransom is at that point. Weigh the pros and cons. You're talking $17 billion a year company. Who
Yeah.
knows? Maybe it's one of those situations where they kind of lock things out and they say, you know what, a couple $1 million, it's worth it. It's one less headache, one less problem, and
Yeah, how
that's
much is it a
something.
day that they're costing to not,
Yeah,
to run, even to run slower, not even to not run, just to run slower is costing them money.
yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that a lot of these malicious actors are starting to realize. They're like, hey, we can get a little bit bold with our prices. We can say it's going to cost you $6 or $7 million because we know in actuality you're making 10 times that in a single day. So even if we're
Right.
crippling you just a little bit, it's enough of an inconvenience that, hey, we can cash out and retire type of deal. So, yeah, companies need to be
Yeah.
wary of this. And it's ransomware is not going anywhere, anywhere. It's only going to grow.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've seen it growing just through the pandemic, and it's only going to get more advanced. And yeah, it's a good point that not only is it costing you what the ransom is, but if it's affecting your business, it's costing you money every single second that you haven't dealt with that too. And ransomware people, the ransomers know that, and it's ransomware is nasty stuff, man. It's probably one of the worst. Now, let's talk a little bit about what we can do about this and how to mitigate it. So I'm going to share this link here. This is something we're going to provide to you guys in the description of this video. This is great research. This is from CISA, US CERT. This is recommendations and immediate actions to reduce exposure across operational technologies, OT, and control system. So operational technologies and control systems includes SCADA. So this is going to be your like non-Windows stuff that is more proprietary, little boxes of things that run on, code built specifically for purpose built stuff. Um, we talked a little bit about that just now. It's hard not only to get a map of it, get control of it, get access to it, but a lot of these things are proprietary, and you can't actually do anything on the box itself, right? Whatever little box you get shipped out there, that's your pipeline controller, right? That thing does what it does, and you don't really get to go in there and mess with it unless you want to break it or unless you're an expert. So you have to put other systems into that OT network, which may not necessarily be designed to work in that system to do security. And you have to build security in a different ways. This gets really hard.
Mm.
So, one of the big things is having a resiliency plan, right? So, having a golden copy of resources such as firmware. This is a big thing. Have a backup not only of your running systems, but of your image. So if at the very worst you have to build everything from fresh, make sure that that is an uncompromised image. Because another thing that's been popular with ransomware that we've talked about in the last breach reports is that they um, pivot out and infect backups and BCP systems as well. So keeping that stuff really separate, like with the OT stuff at the company I worked at, with their administrative systems, those gold discs, what we called it in the army, um, were actually kept on a physical hard drive, which was in a safe, which was in
Hmm.
a guarded shack, which
And
is a good
sometimes
place
it's
to keep them.
physically located in a different area as
Yep,
well. Yeah.
yep. So, so you need to have a resiliency plan. You need to have an incident response plan on top of that. So you have to be able to detect it. You have to be able to respond to it. You have to know which systems you can and cannot turn off. Because some of these things also aren't just control systems. Some of them are safety controls. You know, I can't say who this was, but while I was working in the oil and gas industry, I was privy to some information that another oil and gas company um, was attacked on one of their actual rig systems out there, and the system, one of the systems that was affected was this safety control mechanism that prevented like a big clamp or something from smashing over the middle of it. It's for
Huh.
some part of it, right? But there's sensors, so if people are walked in front of it, it's one of like 5 safety features that keep it from going in there. But some of those stopped working. Unfortunately, other safety controls are already in place, and people did their manual, lockouts with the pins. But had they been in operation and there was a misstep, somebody forgot one thing and that was off, it could cost a life, and that's really serious. It's a super serious consequence. That's
Hmm.
more than money. That's really bad. um, for because that's kind of permanent, and that's something people are going to talk about a long time, so we really want to
I
prevent that.
agree, death is permanent. Yeah. I'm
Absolutely.
just poking fun at
No,
you. No,
I mean,
no, that's a
it's
really great.
permanent for a lot of people.
It's a really great point, and this goes back to something that we've talked. I don't know if we talked about it in any of our videos, but the first reported case, death caused by ransomware, was in 2020. It was in Germany. It was a
Yep.
ransomware attack on a hospital, Dusseldorf, I think is what it
Yep.
was. And the clinic wasn't able to do a lot of its routine operations. So they were diverting patients to a nearby hospital, which was like 20 kilometers away or something like that. So about
Wow.
15-ish miles, 10, 15 miles, something like that.
I mean, that's if
And
it's life threatening, that's
yeah, and
significant.
so that's exactly what happened. A woman who was in urgent need of care was in the ambulance during the attack, was rerouted to the nearby hospital, and because of that rerouting, her injuries, I don't know any of the specifics behind it, but she passed away unfortunately as a result of that, and that's the first reported death caused by ransomware. And like you
Wow.
just brought up a really great point here, where there's facilities and there's operations where there are safety mechanisms that are put into place for very specific reasons to prevent death. And we know about Stuxnet as an example
Yep.
of malicious
It
code
was the
being
first
used.
OT bug, really.
Exactly, of a malicious actor being able to cause physical harm and damage and destruction. Well, this, again, we're talking about first reported case as a result of ransomware. People, I'm
Yeah.
sorry to say, it's not going to be the last, unfortunately.
No, I mean, we should never assume any of this stuff's really going to get better. All we can do is get better ourselves at being aware of it and preventing it. So, a lot of this stuff, OT stuff, really does focus on the company. There's nothing you can really do as a person um, to be safe against OT stuff, unless it's your job to do this. But with IT stuff, certainly, and with last week we talked about very personal and intimate things. You got to be really careful about connecting that up to the internet that's full of people.
Yeah.
So just to kind of close this one out, there's a lot of great stuff from CISA, which again we're going to put this link in our description here. But one of the things you just talked about is having a map. Make sure you have a map immediately, because again, if you don't know where your assets are, if you don't have visibility, you can't do anything about it. All right, so here's the big one that we're really going to get into.
Our main story here.
Yeah, like I said, this is an attack on our team. So this is malware. It's more than malware. It's an entire campaign from an APT that Microsoft Security has designated ZINC. They are affiliated with the DPRK, which is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, aka North Korea. Um, so what they've been doing here, and this is really interesting. So these APT, the ZINC, right? We'll call him a threat actor, right? This threat actor has been getting on Twitter and other platforms and slowly working their way into the threat researcher community by sharing really high quality threat research, vulnerabilities, all this stuff. So it's and this community is, they like that kind of stuff. So, but they're also cautious. So it did take them a long time. They had to build up a lot of trust to get you know uh, to be a trusted member of these groups on Twitter. What they were able to then do is they sent them to their domain, which was br0vvnn.io. Doesn't sound suspicious at all, right?
Not at all. No sus.
However, I will point out that if you're doing threat research, if you're working with this kind of stuff, there are use cases for having your own domains, and they need to be throwaway domains. So you just register, blah blah blah.com, so it's suspicious, but for the audience, not really. And that's kind of what's
Hmm.
really sophisticated about this attack is like they knew their audience, they knew their target really well, and that's um, what stood out to me a lot in this attack.
They came
So,
in, built trust. They provided a wealth of information to the community. They got buy-in, and then when they sent that link out, people said, "Oh yeah, these guys have been around. I've seen them. They're active. These people are trustworthy. We're gonna." Yeah. Yeah. So this looking at this right here. So did they pretend to be an individual in this case? Is that how they were
so
positioning themselves,
um,
or an organization?
it seems to be more than one individual. And in
Yeah.
fact, this one is you can see this here on the screen, right? So we have this Twitter, James Willie. This is actually owned by the Twitter on the right, Zhang Guo. So what he's done is he's come up with some really good. See, here's the ETW, which is, um, oh man, I'm gonna get yelled at for not remembering what this is. It is a tracing program as part of Windows, right? And so what this does is I'll show you in a little bit here, but it's meant to make calls within other programs inside and DLLs and stuff. It's a control mechanism. So ETW is vulnerable part of Windows NT kernel. So this will allow you to get kernel access. Great CVE, brand new CVEs. Thanks to all these guys, those are probably potentially fake as well. Right? And then so he's come over
Spreading
here
it through
now
their network.
on
That's so smart
and
that
then
they're
he
going.
retweeted it. He's like, "Oh, this guy's got a cool thing. I'm gonna retweet it. I like James Willie." Well, they're both James Willie. It's probably a group of people, a group of Twitters, and so they're emulating all the things that you see the threat community doing when sharing this with each other, and so it starts to build trust in that community of, oh, I like what these guys are doing. I'd like to get on board with that.
Yeah. One of the
So they
biggest red flags I kind of see with those types of accounts though are that they're not fully polished, right? So like if yeah, there's no picture of the person there, like I could see this campaign exploding even further out where you could have more detailed Twitter profiles. You could actually I could see an APT. I mean, we know for a fact that they spend months, if not years, planning and executing. Um, and so it wouldn't be that unfathomable for them to have 100+ bot profiles that look like they're clean, have no interaction between each other, but they've built up their own presence individually in the community, and then being able to go out even further. I don't know if that's the extent that they went in this case. I mean, I'm just kind of looking at the one example here, but it's very sophisticated in the fact that they're doing it at an individual level, and they're getting. I mean, look, they know social media. I mean, look at the
some
likes,
serious social
retweets.
engineering.
They
Yeah.
know they know what the community. They know their audience, like you said before. So yeah, this is super super sophisticated in that regard. But it's also
So
simple. You know what I mean? Like
yes.
it's so simple.
Oh yeah. And it's funny because the next thing we're going to talk about is simple, effective phishing campaigns as well.
Hmm.
So simplicity kind of is the name of the game here because sometimes when things get too complicated, you can start to see all the little red flags, right? So the less red flags you can put in there, the better. Um, what and while this is really good social engineering because you said these aren't fully fleshed out Twitter profiles, but a lot of threat researcher profiles aren't, especially if they're newer, not well known. Because there's actually a lot of risk in being a threat researcher too. It's you're a white hat, but some of these guys still can get in trouble with the FBI. Some companies don't really appreciate you doing threat research on them, and there's appropriate ways to do it, and you can follow all the right ways to do it and still get kind of lambasted. Uh, it's a
No, I see
an
what you mean. I
interesting
mean,
it's an interesting field.
you're poking on the external walls of a company, and people don't like
Uninvited.
that. Uninvited, yeah, they don't like that. Unless you're doing like a bug bounty type of situation, but at that case, you're talking to those big
Right.
companies. But yeah, I know
Yeah, a
what
lot
you
of them
mean.
are doing bug bounties, but there are people out there who are doing more gray hat research, and You can have your opinions on whether or not people should be doing that, but my opinion is that doing threat research for good is a good thing, and it's really crazy to see that this new vector is like attacking those people directly, right?
Yeah.
So once they get okay, so here's the thing they're trying to do, right? You see this blog, br0vbn.io. This is what I just talked about. This is their malicious domain. So check it out. This is my first blog post. I'm a brand new threat researcher. And this guy who already has 690 followers, right? This guy's got 1,268 followers, right? So, not a ton, but enough to get exposure and go, hey, this guy's is really good. So he built false rapport and false reputation with himself, basically.
Right. Yeah. Super
So
easy to do. Super
right.
easy to do.
So now people are like, okay, let's check out what this guy's got. Let's see these CVEs. And so you go to the website, and what happens is you end up with a malicious Visual Studio product known as browse.vc.db, which is a well-known binary. So here's and again why it's really sophisticated. So it's a pre-build in a .NET MS Build projects, right? Which are it's a I'm not a developer, but it's used for this kind of stuff, right? Because you can do reverse engineering, you can pull code apart, and you can look for vulnerabilities. It's part of a lot of these tools. So nothing suspicious about that being in there. However, there's a malicious DLL on there rather than the actual database file. This is the comebacker malware right here. And that's what Microsoft Defender calls this. It's a pre-built event with a PowerShell command, which then runs run DLL. You launch it through run DLL 32, which is a super common DLL that runs all the time on Windows machines. So it doesn't look too suspicious there. Here's the actual PowerShell pre-build event right here. So they're assembling this, and here you see the database file that's supposed to be this browse this binary, right? But where it puts this comma in and then all this, that's because that's not actually a DB file. That is a DLL, a dynamic link library, and you can point to a specific line in that DLL using this. By the way, this is part of the way that you use DLL injection to cheat in Modern Warfare 3. Because
A little tidbit.
they use a client side trusted model. But I mean, my point in saying that is these techniques aren't necessarily anything insane. This is the kind of stuff that kids are doing to play games, right? So
Hmm.
it can be used in a lot of ways. The DLLs can be abused quite a bit. There's a lot of kind of risk in the way that they work because their whole point is they're meant to make programs talk to each other in Windows, which can be great for nefarious purposes. So this comebacker malware, what does this thing do? This thing's actually uh, the first step of a longer cyber chain on this. So it's actually trying to get in here, make some changes to um, as you can see here, I'm sorry, registry files, right? And this thing right here. So these actually iterate. These are some files it leaves. They change to avoid detection, so that you can't always go search for just that string, right? So they're going to be something a little
Mm.
bit different each time, kind of help hide itself a little bit more. So it's trying to evade just from getting itself set up, and then it tries to do process privilege escalation using those DLLs. So on at the lower level, and assumingly at this kernel access, like they've shared in the blog above, is trying to make more connections, pull in resources so that it can download more malware. Clackring's another malware that's involved in this, another DLL. This one actually builds a malicious service on the machine. So first you get the foothold, you build the privilege escalation, then the Clackring malware takes over. Clackring now has the privileges it needs to build a malicious service. That's actually running just constantly on the system. It's dropped directly into the system 32 folder, so it's in a area that's expected to be running these types of files, which helps it again evade detection. It's running with the .sys file extension, which typically don't even get looked at by like user account control or anything. Like those just are allowed to run. So this thing now has a really good foothold in here. Um, the other part of this attack, is when they go to this blog page, the blog page that they're sent, another version was like, well, if you don't want to go to my domain, here's the blog. It's an MHTML file. This MHTML file contains JavaScript. The JavaScript calls out to a domain and does remote code execution, right? And you're told to run this through Internet Explorer, and gee, I wonder why. um, with instructions to open it with Internet Explorer, which, by the way, is a deprecated browser. It's Microsoft Edge now. So that's also a big red flag right there. Is trying to run things exclusively in Internet Explorer is generally because it's going to be able to get around all the stuff that the Chromium project has built in to prevent these kinds of things from running. Site was down time. So I don't know entirely what that one's getting them to do. It's running remote code execution. I'm assuming it's bringing in more of this malware. So there's another malware still involved in here. So they've got the foothold, they've got the privilege escalation, they've got remote code execution abilities, right? So you can kind of see the chain they've built up. So now on your system, they have an account and a program that can run privileged access, and they have a connection to their servers to be able to run commands through that, right? So now you see their foothold. One of the instances, they actually downloaded an old version of a file called viraglt64.sys, which is a driver from an antivirus program called VirIT Explorer, which is one I've never heard of before. I looked it up briefly before this. It looks legitimate. It's got a lot of other industries talking about it. There's some, those like sales certifications. We've got the
Mm-hmm.
gold, whatever. But, um, it's not like some like little built at home antivirus like some people have, right? This is an actual legit one that you can buy. Just I guess a little bit less popular. I don't really know how this is used. Um, So they, but what they did was they took an old, outdated, abusable version of that driver and just downloaded the driver file, again, a .sys file, so it can avoid detection. They exploited an old CVE from 2017, and they were able to gain an arbitrary kernel write ability. So in this case, they said the actor's code was buggy, and it actually overwrote some of its own code and crashed the machine itself. So doesn't seem like this worked when the researchers tested it. But this is kind of an interesting one. They said in one instance they found this, and it may just be a one-off, but I really thought it was eye-catching here because the fact that they're using a driver from an antivirus software is again one of those like, hey, trust me, I'm a trusted file. You know this .sys file.
Mm-hmm.
It
It's
really
okay to
seems like
update me. Just
right.
look now.
So they're trying to. It seems like they're trying to get around like reputation-based stuff and signature imprints because some antiviruses can be tricked into allowing malware to run if enough of the code matches a good reputable signature, such as a semantic signature or something, right?
Mm.
So
So is it like
um,
some type of like a percentage threshold or enough of it
yeah,
matches, 70% match, therefore just let it in.
right. Or some of them are really terrible and they only look at like the last few lines of the package and go, "Oh, well that looks like a video game, you're good." And it's actually not a video game. So this is a story one of my buddies told me about something just like this. It was like Age of Empires, which isn't a very big game anymore, right? With malware pasted in front of it. But then because this one type of antivirus only read from bottom up, it was like, "Oh, this is Age of Empires. You're good to go."
Wow, that's so crazy.
There's more malware involved in this too. So this thing just downloaded a bundle of junk onto these computers. They actually also had a Chrome password stealer bundled in with this as well. Um, it was hosted on a domain over here, another domain, codevexillium.org. So earlier up here, they're able to do remote code execution. That means they could have called back here and pulled down yet another DLL file. Let's see, it goes into a data file. Where was it? Yes, cryptlib. Okay, so this is kind of cool. So they used a weaponized version of the cryptlib library, which is a library package, and we're able to use that to decrypt the Chrome passwords on these machines as well. And while all this is going on, they have command and control running on the targeted devices. There's a backdoor setup. They have a they have a backdoor, they have remote code execution, they have kernel level access, they have a lot of files running, in an evasive mode that's going to take a while to get caught. Obviously, Microsoft did eventually catch them, but it's man, it's a really interesting campaign. There's a lot of software in here. There's really good social engineering. I really think the social engineering is the best part of this. It sounds like the malware is a little but the social engineering is awesome. Um, uh,
Yeah, that part's really impressive to me. Yeah, because we know even the platform they used is really impressive because we know that the infosec community spends a lot of time on Twitter. That's where they share their information and their news, and to infiltrate it at that level is just. I mean, I'm sure it's happened before in the past, but something like this, we just being more cautious about everything we've talked about, even at the beginning of the show. Be cautious about what you put online. Be cautious about who you trust. It's the old adage of don't trust something just because someone on the internet said it was true.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. What do you do to prevent this, to mitigate this? Number one, well, don't trust something online. However, with the targets in this instance, right? Like they need this stuff, right? If you're trying to do threat research, you have to download malware and POCs and all these kinds of things and test them. So you need to be doing this, and if you're a good threat researcher, you are doing this in a isolated environment on a laptop that you can throw in the dumpster if you need to. Um, don't actually do that. Don't throw your laptops in the dumpster. um, but so first of all, if you've been to this domain, if you feel like this has happened to you, you need to run a full anti-malware scan. Microsoft's Windows Defender has been updated with the signatures necessary to identify this malware. So make sure you're updated. Run your scan. If you see anything of any of these, Microsoft's recommendation is to just completely, you should assume full compromise and just rebuild it, which I agree. It's pretty nasty, and it looks like they're still investigating what some of this malware is doing, because there's a bunch of different stuff that happened after they established the foothold. So it's possible that there's a few people or a few teams as part of this APT who were going after different things
Mhm.
based on the way they were working on this. So something that again, we'll post this in our description as well. Microsoft has posted up all the IOCs that you're going to need to do your threat hunting to find out if you've been compromised. Look at this LinkedIn profiles. So I mean, they've done a,
Wow,
a
LinkedIn,
giant,
Twitter,
yep, giant
all those open
campaign.
source profiles that you can spin up a dozen of those and get them live and looking legit
Here's the
in
C2.
a matter of like hours, if
Look
that. I
at
mean, if
this.
that.
Look at this. I look at this. Angel donation blog, investbooking.de, Kraken, which is, cyber crypto, Kraken,
That's really interesting.
krakenfolio.com, right? So
That's really interesting that they're targeting that investment space. I mean, we know we don't need to get too deep into it right now, but we know everything that's kind of going on in the investment world, Reddit's involvement and everything. But yeah, that's really interesting because I know for a fact that like some YouTube channels, for example, make a lot of money through having these investment style channels in these shows. And I
right.
wonder if it's just one of those situations where it's like, okay, let's hook someone in who we know is interested about investing, who we know probably has a little bit of money to burn. Let's see how we can compromise them. But no, that's very tangential to all of this. But I think that that's really interesting that they targeted that. And then of course the donation is just pretty straightforward. Goodwill, target people's, um, uh, goodwill campaign type of thing.
Well, and I'm wondering too if this is part of the social engineering, threat researchers are also not just threat researchers, but people in our industry. They're also interested in investing in cryptocurrencies. We know what's going on right now with that whole stock market madness, and a lot of those types who are out there investing in crypto and Wall Street bets, right? They're IT guys, they're cybersecurity guys, as well as plenty of other things. So my assumption when I saw this right away, because I was actually thinking about using Kraken to buy some Dogecoin this week. And if they're doing research and if they're monitoring their network traffic like they should be, maybe they might miss this and they're like, oh, Kraken, yeah, I know, I'm waiting for my Doge to skyrocket, so I'm okay with those callbacks,
Mm.
invest booking. So it's hard to say exactly, but it definitely looks like they're trying to seem as legitimate as possible in everything, in their domains and their Twitters, all of this stuff. Here's also an interesting one: likely legitimate but compromised websites. And that's another one that's pretty popular with malware in general, is also using other domains that have been compromised because you need their reputation in order to get around spam filters and things like that.
Yeah, that's very easy to just go to expireddomains.net and just pick up a whole bundle of them.
This link that we'll provide also has all of the hash values for the comebacker malware, the clackering malware, all the ones we talked about here. So there's so much stuff. Folder paths. I mean, this was one heck of a campaign, and there's a ton of great information on it. It's really fascinating to me just because I haven't really seen stuff targeting this group of victims before. I hate calling them victims, but
The victims, yeah,
I
their
know.
targets, yeah. So,
Yeah,
let's follow this story as it
absolutely.
continues to emerge. I think that there's going to be a lot more, as if every APT that we've covered in this series and in others before. We don't know what the true impact will be, sometimes years down the line. We don't know what investigations are ongoing and behind the scenes. A lot of that information is privileged and they're not going to just share it out because it may compromise the investigation.
Absolutely.
So we'll keep abreast of the situation here, and if there's anything that's worth calling back to all of this, we'll definitely bring that back up in a future video.
Yeah, definitely. So let's move on to the next one here. I mentioned this briefly, but simple, effective phishing. LogoKit is a group that has set off a new phishing campaign this last week. This information comes to us from Risk IQ. They do threat research as well, and this is their blog. So LogoKit, what is this? It's a phishing kit, meaning it's a tool set. Um, Something that you use on the legitimate side is like GoFish as a, doing when you're doing penetration testing, if you want to actually do phishing testing for companies. So this is something that would be kind of like that, but specifically tuned for nefarious purposes. Um, it's targeted to users of more than 300 websites, which they don't really talk about in, specifically, but a bunch of websites. What they're trying to grab is credentials for SharePoint, OneDrive, Adobe Document Cloud storage, right? So like for like personal private cloud storage creds. Um, they found that there were over 700 unique domains in the past month running this kit, which is that's a lot. That's significant. I don't know how big these phishing campaigns typically run, but I mean, just 700 domains sounds like a pretty big campaign to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's and that's really gives them a lot of spread, right? You can get a bunch of different top level domains. You can get a lot of different regional access, different countries. Um, so the potential what am I trying to say here? The number of potential targets that you have could be really big if you're running this off of a ton of domains, as well as, if these are legitimate domains, if they're stolen domains, if they're taken over domains, then they're going to be getting around um, reputation scores, they're going to be getting through filters. And actually, one of these things that I want to expand on that was getting around the filters. So what makes this a little bit more unique and a little bit more advanced is not only in the way that they're crafting these, but in the way that they're getting around filters in Gmail and AWS. So first of all, they're sending people an email that brings them to a nasty domain.logokit.com, right? And then kind of injects it right here, the target email of who they're trying to go after. You get one of these login screens. Now this looks familiar, right? This is like the Google login screen. Looks just like this. It's a little, the little white square pop up. It's got their logo. It's got their name. All these things. Now what they've done is they built like a template, and depending on who they want to call back to, and it depends on whether or not you've got the Google service, the Adobe service, or whatever. You click this thing and it pops up. The little square there where the logo is and the square where the name is actually is a JavaScript that's calling back to Google, for example, like Google's what is it called here, Firebase, right, or Clearbit, or their favicon database. So what you can do is you can pull a legitimate Google logo, you can pull a legitimate Google text, and if you were to right click and inspect on those images, you would see that this website was in fact calling to the legitimate Google domain to show you its image. So that appears at first to be legitimate. It automatically disables the username login and it extracts the email from you. So that it looks even more legit, like, oh, this is definitely not a login because it already pulled my email. It's not asking me to type it in, so you may think that you're not sending it to somebody then because typically it's when they want you to type it into a thing. A lot of people have been taught in phishing is don't type your credentials into a website you don't trust.
Mm-hmm.
But how often do we see that it just auto pulls it up and fills it for you, and you're like, cool, got it. I love my autofill. It makes my life easier.
Click next. Awesome.
Yep. So and that's Ajax request it's using to grab all this stuff. Some really good coding in there. So it's super simple. The frame always looks like this. The email looks the same. Like they just had to build this one thing, and it's just going to call back to whoever it needs to, depending on the target
Yeah.
victim. So it
And
makes
by
it
the
really
way,
simple.
like you mentioned GoFish before, we
Mhm.
we we actually use GoFish
Yep.
for a lot of our phishing campaigns, and in the past we had issues with getting general campaigns to clear Gmail spam filters because
Mhm.
Gmail's spam filters are actually really really good. And for the most part, if you don't already have the active domain that in use that you're going to use against the target,
Right.
um, it's going to be able to pick it up pretty easily. So this is actually a really big deal that it's bypassing the general spam filter. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention was the ability to like call and bring the favicon out onto the page itself is really unique and very interesting. But the fact is, being able to set up that page itself. I mean, all you have to do, and what we've done in the past is we go to like a Google login page, like your Gmail login page or whatever, log out of the account, and we just open up the source code of the page itself. I think it's like Control U or something like that, or you just right click and view source code. Control all, copy that into the page builder, and all of a sudden you have the entire page. Now, obviously, like the JavaScript commands aren't going to work properly, but you don't need that. All you need is something that's going to capture the the credentials when they click the login button. Or if you're super sophisticated, you can have some type of keylogger in the background where it doesn't matter if they hit submit or not. All they have to do is type something in, and you've captured
Right.
everything.
Exactly. Um, yeah, and it's interesting to see, it, this is another instance of the attackers kind of learning from what the blue team does, right? Like we know what everyone's trained to look out for in phishing attacks because everybody gets that training, and so this is kind of a way to, um, use that knowledge against them, right? We know what people are going to look for and call a red flag, so we're going to try to eliminate those red flags and build a different type of campaign.
Um,
Um, and that's the type of thing where, like I said, when shouldn't expect things to get better, is because of that. It's like the information that's out there to train you to defend it is always going to get weaponized to build better attacks. Now, you talked a little bit about the uh, Go Fish, right? You couldn't get around some of the filters because the domain you were using wasn't reputable. One of the ways that these guys are getting around it, and this is another thing that makes it a little bit more unique, is they're actually using legitimate object storage buckets for their script that's in this phishing email. So they're storing things at Google Firebase, Google Cloud Platform, S3 buckets. Looks like Yandex has something similar to Google's cloud hosting, GitHub, right? So these are DigitalOcean, all this stuff. These are all legitimate, right? This is where if you're building scripts, you build your scripts like this, and you can host them there, and tons and tons and tons of websites and people host their scripts at these locations and make calls. So you can't block these domains. Filters aren't going to filter this stuff out because it's not going to work. You're going to have all kinds of availability issues if you just outright block it. So that's a really sneaky way to continue to get past the filters there is, by with high level investigation, with cursory investigation, this is coming from Google. It's using the Google fave icon. It's already pre-filled my Gmail. All I have to do is type in my password, right?
Mhm.
That's and And so the thing is, it's pretty much done that already. It is staged for the malicious attackers, right? It's like, okay, we're just waiting for your password because we already know what your email is. We just send you the email, right? That's all they need is that password, and it's definitely going to get through. And it's amazing that it gets through because let me scroll back up real quick here. They pointed this out and they blocked out this kind of left hand section of what the actual domain is here, but it is this same thing down here, which looks horrible. Now they've X'd out certain sections of this for obvious reasons, but this is not a legitimate looking domain. This looks awful and terrible, but because of all the other stuff that they've done, they've hosted everything in the right buckets, using the right API calls, using the right logos, they get through, they get to the user and people will click them. Um, 300 sites have been targeted, and so that's Gmail and everybody else. They're being hosted all over the place, which means you can host one, like I said, in every country, in every state that you want it to be in, so that it can look more and more legitimate. Simple, effective, extremely deceptive campaign, but once it's probably had a lot going into building this, but that's it. I mean, then you just send it out, and you only need a few clicks, right?
Yep. We talk about it time and time again. You can have all of the robust security controls in place, but all it takes is one person, one click, and it negates all of that.
Yep.
It gives that person, that malicious actor, a foothold, and depending on what they're trying to do, they're able to get access into your network, escalate privileges, facilitate an attack, or maybe they just chill out there and they never get
Serve.
caught. And because you don't have a robust uh, threat hunting program, or you don't have a SOC implemented um, uh, for your organization, it just sits there and it's collecting that data, it's exfiltrating that data, maybe it's selling your data, maybe it's using it for um, competitor intelligence, whatever the case might be. um,
Espionage. Oh yeah.
yeah, no, I think that this is, it's one of those things where you kind of get like a broken record feel. It's like, okay, they're going to talk about phishing again, and it's like, well, yeah, because you people keep clicking the links.
Well, and I was just gonna say, to be honest, these days I would go a step further and just say never click a link out of your email. Even if you specifically requested to reset your password, like if you have a password reset link that's that little specific thing, okay, copy and paste it, use those. But if it's not something that you've specifically requested and you're just getting one that says like, hey, it's been 90 days, update it, or and I've seen this before that was actually a malicious phishing attempt that I got where it was one of those ones that says, oh, somebody tried to access your account and
Mm.
we've reset it for you, which you usually get from Google. And you log in and you see somebody from Iran or from somewhere on the other side of the planet try to log into your account. So they do the same kind of thing, and they're using techniques like this against you. So if you want to go on and reset your password, go straight to the website because you're going to the right thing. And again, as always, check the entire URL because they didn't even try
Yeah.
to hide it in this one. It's just kind of
That's a
silly
pretty
that this
blatant
works.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. um, so real quick, just to kind of talk about why this is a big deal. This comes from Verizon's their incident response database and all their research that they do. But let's go real quick to summary of findings here. Uh, this is all about all kinds of breaches. I was trying to find their statistic. Oh, maybe I didn't link to the right thing. But they shared a statistic here that said 67%. There was a 67% increase, I believe, in phishing this year. I think I sent this to
Just
you
so far
earlier.
this year.
So far this year,
Mm,
yes,
I
absolutely.
believe it.
And sorry, here we go. Errors along with credential theft and social attacks made up 67% of breaches this
Mm.
year. So that's, I mean, and social attacks, we just talked about the huge Zinc one, some giant social attacks. So that was pretty crazy. All right. Last one we want to talk about for the day, and this is somebody we haven't talked about before in APT, and I don't really see him too often, is Hezbollah, aka the Lebanese terror group, right? They've been dubbed Lebanese Cedar. That's their APT group name. They're linked to the Hezbollah militant group. Security firm ClearSky said that they identified at least 250 servers, which are telecom servers and ISP servers, hacked by this APT in numerous countries. So this was the United States, the UK, Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Palestine, Jordan, and other areas, other countries in the Levant and Gaza area. So what they were targeting were ISPs and telecoms like Vodafone, um, some regional offices. Let's see if we can get down here real quick too. Yeah, here's the victim list. So this isn't a complete victim list. This is some of the ones that actually the APT themselves shared. So here in the United States, we've got Oklahoma Office of Management and Enterprise Services, which is a government agency that manages and supports the Oklahoma government. So it's something they have there locally. A web hosting infrastructure solution, and Frontier Communications. I'm sure some
That's a
people out there
big
have heard of
company,
them.
by
Yeah,
the way. Very big
yes,
telecom company.
yes. We got IOMark Cloud in UK. I don't really know anything about them. Vodafone Egypt. Vodafone's super popular in Europe. I know when I was there, and they're pretty big in a lot of countries. So you can you can imagine Vodafone's like a Verizon or a Sprint here in the United States, right?
Hmm.
T-Mobile's kind of everywhere, but um, they have a lot of these regional places as well. Saudi Arabia has had quite a few telecommunications services companies, telephones and voice. Jordan, um, Jordanian Universities Network, right? So it's a private organization just for their universities. So there's all kinds of stuff that they went after here. It's some kind of just big
Lots
spread.
of infrastructure, telecom specific attack. Um,
Yes.
we talked about that one before in previous videos where that's the pipeline to our information era.
Layers two and
And,
three.
you know, what information they were looking for. I mean, who knows? But I mean, if we're talking like Cold War type of situation scenarios, click of a button, you put someone back into the Stone Age. You turn off all their access to
Yeah.
information, you turn off their electrical grid, and they are literally not the Stone Age, sorry, more like medieval times. But I
Bronze
mean,
Age. Sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean, like, think about what advantage you could have over another country whose complete communication systems are down, especially in the rise
Absolutely.
of an attack. You click the button, then you send the nuke, and then
Yep.
all of those defense capabilities, or you click the button, you put the electrical grid, and then you just sit back and you wait, because these aren't things that you can just spin up overnight. I mean, if you turn off power, water treatment plants,
Well,
and
if you shut off the
communications,
stock exchange.
um, yeah, no, but what
I
I'm
mean,
getting at is that it's an infrastructure. Yeah, I mean, yeah, of
yeah,
course you're gonna get people to freak out, but what I'm getting at is the infrastructure play. You shut down
sure.
electricity, you shut down water, and you shut down communications. You can completely erode a society overnight,
Yeah.
because people are going to go into panic mode. People are going to go um, riots. I mean, all of these different things are going to. People will riot if they don't have their cell phone. I swear, people will riot if they can't get onto Twitter and complain about. Oh, turn my phone on and complain about someone on Twitter. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and my point of saying, like the stock exchange too is like not necessarily like it doesn't have to be targeted like that, right? If you're hitting the ISP that all of the stuff runs on and you shut it down, like if you shut down all of the communications, like people can't call, people can't email, people can't do anything. I mean,
Hmm.
It's their personalized, it's emergency services. We just talked about the potential life-threatening impacts of things like this. You can't call 911, can't email, can't anything. And I'm pretty sure a lot of those, like life alert type things, have to use the same kind of
Oh yeah.
communications as well. So there's all kinds of stuff that's on there, and that's
That's a good point.
that's really depth attacks. Like when you get these web app attacks, it's like way up here on the internet, and there's a ton of information that people stuff up there, and that's usually why you want to go up there is to get information. But I mean, if you can lay on the lines, it's like the government. You're wiretapping, right? If you can listen to the phones, you can listen to everything, which is kind of the same thing that they're doing here. They can touch all of your networks and phones. So let's talk a little bit about what they're actually trying to do, and this is where it's kind of neat. So um, what they're doing is uh, they found these companies first of all by scanning the internet for vulnerable and outdated Atlassian and Oracle servers, which is a big no-no. Those shouldn't be on the internet. I'm just so anybody who got hit with this hasn't been doing a good job of keeping their network-facing security up to date. First of all, if they were getting targeted with old, outdated malware. Exploitable vulnerabilities are a pretty egregious thing to have. That's a high criticality in your network, and you should be getting rid of that within the day of finding it. It should be your top priority because of things like this. So the vulnerable versions of these web servers allowed them to install web shells on them. They use web shells like ASPX Spy, Caterpillar 2, Mamad Warning, one I haven't heard of, and an open source tool called JSP File Browser. Seems self-explanatory what the purpose of that is. Um, that was here on the right just behind the firewalls and security controls. That didn't apparently do much. Then we've got Confluence, Jira, which is Atlassian. Both those are Atlassian, and Oracle Web. Now, what's interesting is on the Oracle Web specifically, in this report is where they saw them pivoting into the internal networks using a RAT, a remote access Trojan, called Explosive. And this is, I think, what ultimately led to them attributing this specifically as Hezbollah is because Hezbollah uses the explosive rat, according to this research. If you see that, it's Hezbollah. So some good, easy attribution there. So this rat then allowed them to get onto, as you can see, desktops, everything, the whole network. So that's some pretty good access there. These vulnerabilities are relatively new. This is not. That's pretty bad. That's bad. CVE 2012. Oracle Fusion. Okay, so those. Do you know anything about Oracle Fusion? I actually don't know what those servers do. I'm
I'm
assuming
not
it's something like this.
familiar with them, but it seems to me as if no, I don't know anything about it to speak to it confidently.
Yeah, I'm assuming it does something similar to these two. If I guess they're put them all together, but yeah, I'd be interested in checking out a little bit more about that. So they identified 254 infected servers worldwide. 135 of them shared the same hash as the files they identified in a victim's network during their initial investigation. What they're saying there is they see the same malware on 135 systems, so the exact same file. So that's suggesting it was downloaded in the exact same campaign at probably around the
Hmm.
same time. Um, they're still investigating this, so they don't yet have where the foothold was established, whether it was phishing or anything like that. We can take a look here at Clear Sky's description of the Lebanese Cedar APT, just updated 2 days ago, actually. So was that Thursday? Very recent. Um, so also this comes in conjunction with Kaspersky and Checkpoint Labs. Look at this, all the way back to 2012. So that's the first beard stash. I guess that's is it a malware? Something like that. So look at that. We talked about this before that these campaigns go back years, right? This is 8 years. It's almost a decade. That's a long time to be on the same campaign.
Yeah.
So checkpoint report, Symantec report right here, and silent persistent activity for 5 years. They sat in their network for 5 years.
Mm.
That's a very long time to sit.
This gets me thinking about something a little bit different. the lengths that people have to go through to circumvent these controls, it's actually a good thing, right? It means that at least it's mitigating and preventing in some fashion. Like, it's not just the doom and gloom of, buy this tool set, deploy it, and you'll be safe. It's, in conjunction, you have this orchestra of all of your security programs. You have good security hygiene, is the terminology that we would use. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's at least comforting to me to see that it does take very long, drawn out, sophisticated campaigns to be able to exploit things at this level, because at least it tells me to some degree that these actors need to work to circumvent. Like, it's not just something
Yeah.
that they can overnight deploy. So yeah, while the risks are changing daily, it's still one of those situations where you need to put the human element into it. It's not just the technology and whatever processes they have established for deploying their attacks, but it's also that human factor, that it does take time, it does take manpower. Someone does need to go out there and write the code. Someone does need to come up with these campaigns and go out there and create the Twitter accounts, or the, you know, from the previous story we were just talking about, and whatever the case might be.
Yeah. To be honest, I'd prefer if this were the only kind of attacks we really saw as ones that took this long to execute, because it does kind of show that security stuff is working, or at least that it's working enough that they have to think about it and get around it. Unfortunately, though, which we've already seen with this breach report, is there's some just really stupid reasons people still get attacked, like by simple stuff, and that's we'll never be rid of attacks, but I feel like we can get rid of a lot of that kind of stuff, like not programming in hard coded passwords of 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. Just imagine if nobody ever did that. Lenovo would be fine. Solar winds might not have happened. That's it's the little things like that that we see with these, especially advanced attackers. It's just a tiny little chip in the armor can become a very, very deep and widespread attack on their network.
That's all it
Um,
takes.
and so, one thing I do want to show you, we're over an hour now, so it's probably one of our longer ones. But I want to talk a little bit about what these malwares are doing. They're self-developed tools, which is that's what you're talking about right there. That's manpower, that's work, that's time and money, and that's why typically you see a lot of that stuff with the APT, because they have the resources to be able to do that. So Caterpillar 2.0 by NT, some kind of web shell. Explosive, just talked about that. That's the remote access tool, RAT. It's been around, been used by this threat actor since 2015, and was modified over time to include new features, also very common with them. They used Dirbuster, web hacking tool. I love Dirbuster. It's so easy. So GoBuster and Dirbuster, all they're trying to do is, like, you're just trying to figure out what's out there, right? Show me all of their directories on this device so I can decide where I want to go. They had that JSP file browser, which is something you'd use after Dirbuster to go look around. And Dirbuster is very command line. It can be put in a tool, which is probably kind of what this is doing, like a JSP file browser. So you use these things together, you kind of load it up in a file browser, and you've suddenly got one of those nice, clickable, interactive GUI windows. It makes things a lot easier when you're trying to steal information. Um, SharPy shell, Python shell. It's an obfuscated ASP.NET web shell, which is kind of interesting. So a ton of obfuscation here, trying to hide. There's that ASPX spy, which is a CNC. Actually, it's okay. So it provides control over a compromised web server, and so that's what they were using to compromise web servers, and then use them as CNC servers, able to pivot into their internal networks. Download that RAT AdMiner database management tool written in PHP. So looks like they're using that also to have a database of all the stuff that they're stealing in there. There's some Iranian based web shells that were noticed in there. So there's that Mamad warning I was wondering about. um, and so that's interesting. So they probably have taken this from the Iranians, or who knows, maybe been given it by the Iranians. I don't know how all that stuff works out there in terms of their
They're
political
not using their
affiliations.
own toolkits, right? In
They're
all.
Well, yeah. Um, it's a combination, right? So they've got a little bit of their tools,
Yeah,
they've
yeah,
got
that's what
some
I
other
meant.
tools that somebody else got that worked, and I mean that's probably just hey, don't reinvent the wheel, just use
Yeah,
something
yeah,
somebody
yeah.
else has done. Um, Quite a big kill chain here. This is a super long PDF. I'm not going to get down into it, but I will. This will be the other thing that we put into our description here.
Yeah, we'll add that in a link there. Okay, this is great, Josh. Thanks for walking us through this episode of the Breach Report. Obviously, if you find this content helpful, like, share, subscribe, do all that stuff, helps the channel. If you don't find this content helpful, do me a favor, hit the dislike button, and if you do, if you do that, comment and tell us why. We want to improve. We always want to improve. We want to provide the best information that we can to you guys. And one thing that we do keep harping on is, if you are a threat analyst, if you're a malware researcher, please reach out, get in touch with us on our website. We want to hear from you. Maybe bring you on to one of our videos to talk a little bit more in depth about maybe the SolarWinds attack, maybe a new breach that comes out. Maybe we want to follow up on a previous story. World is our oyster on that front. But yeah, so Josh, any
Yes.
closing thoughts?
No, I mean you said it. I'm not a threat researcher by profession. It's just something that I do as part of my job. I've done a little bit of everything. So I'm definitely one of those people who thinks I don't know anything, even though I know something. But I'd love to have some more experts and really in any field. If there's something that if there's something on the show that you know more about, or you want to correct us on, or you have more information on, definitely reach out to us, please. All we're trying to do here is share correct information with everybody. So that's really our main goal.
All right, folks. Well, until next week, thank you so much for joining us.